Hi guys, it's Tracy. Welcome back to my channel. So today I am doing a review on Kelly Yang's Parachutes. So with this one here, I really had no intentions of reading it in the beginning until I saw it available on the Libby app to borrow from my local library. Now the Libby app, if you didn't know, is a way to access your local library digitally, so they'll be able to upload any ebooks available to borrow, any audiobooks, and you can just borrow it from there. And it's been great during this self-isolation period because obviously I can't access my local library. I was also really surprised to see it on there because I'm fairly sure that the release date for Parachutes in Australia isn't until September, at least that's what I've seen, whereas it has been released in the US in May of this year. So Parachutes centers around two girls by the name of Danny and Claire, both in their 11th year of high school. Now Claire was born and raised in Shanghai. She is part of a very wealthy and privileged family. Danny, on the other hand, is from a Filipino background. She comes from a very humble family. Her mother works very hard to support not just herself but also her own parents back home in the Philippines. Claire ends up being sent to the US by her parents to finish off her high schooling years. She ends up living with a host family, which is Danny's family, and then you start to follow their lives, how different they are, and then how their lives collide once they live together. Now, the term parachutes itself is explained in the book, but essentially it is to describe international students, specifically Chinese international students in this book, who are picked up from their homeland or China and, or in Claire's case, Shanghai, and sent across to the US and left there to study without their parents or their family. And they live with a number of host families. So that's Claire's situation in this case, and she's nicknamed Parachutes as soon as she gets there. So like I said, Claire comes from a very wealthy family. She's got the privilege, the status. She's very used to just getting things done for her, buying things when she needs to, wearing designer clothes. Her family's very big on maintaining appearance, having a good reputation, and that's partly why they've sent her off to the US so that she gets that prestige and that honor that comes from studying abroad, basically. Danny, on the other hand, is a very, very intelligent girl. Because her family isn't very well off, she's on a full academic scholarship in her school. She is part of the debating team and she's kind of the shining star there. And this is her ticket or her entryway into getting into Yale, at least that's what she's hoping to. And it's her way of showing people that despite the fact that she hasn't been born into money or have privilege, she can still make it to the top. I was super, super excited to film this review. I only finished this book 2 days ago. Now for me, when I read the first 50 pages or so, I thought it was going to be on the fluffier side of things. There was a kind of Gossip Girl, high school drama-esque vibe that came from that originally, and I think that was because of Danny's voice and the fact that she was living in Shanghai in the first part. And, you know, her mum takes her out to this really fancy restaurant and her dad buys her Prada just because. And I was like, okay, like, wonder where this story is going to go. And then once the book hit its stride and got to the climax, and then from there on, I was really blown away by how in depth and impactful Parachutes really is. So I can really narrow down the reasons why I absolutely loved reading this book, and that comes down to the themes that were explored in this, how meaningful the book is, and then how much Kelly Yang puts herself into this book so that we as readers can become personally or emotionally invested because of how raw and honest the book is. So yeah, I would say that you could already tell that there's themes around classism, racism, you know, the ideas of privilege and what it is and what that grants you and life. All those themes are definitely in there. But I will give you a trigger or a content warning now in saying that there is sexual assault and sexual harassment that comes up in this book, amongst all the other kind of themes that Kelly Yang tries to explore. So just bear that in mind, and if you're not comfortable reading about that, then just make sure that you're okay yourself and you're in the right mindset if you do decide to read this book. But yeah, there is a lot that's unpacked in Parachutes, and Granted, the book is very short to really dive deep into these things, but I think Kelly Yang does execute it very well. She's able to convey, one, the difference between, having money and not having money, understanding the value of money, and as well as taking for granted the things that not a lot of other people might have. It's just that you're surrounded by these people who have the same privilege and the same wealth and status as you. So you kind of get used to that and you think it's a norm. And then in reality, they don't have the same benefits or the same advantages as you, and they have to work so hard. And you kind of see the clash between there, which I think was done really well, that contrasting between the two lives, especially when Claire comes to live with Danny. And then you also have discussions around racism, which I think is fairly common when it comes to an international student or like a student of color moving into a school that is predominantly of white background. Um, but then you also see how, you know, colored people who were born in the US treat people who are of color and have moved across from a different country. And that I think is very interesting because, and I would have to say that I've noticed that growing up in Australia as well, is that like, I was born in Australia, and I've noticed that we, especially as Asians, do treat people from, you know, Asian countries who move into Western countries quite differently. There's still that notion that, hey, like, yes, we're Asian, but they're different because they they grew up uh, in like the motherland, whereas we didn't, which I think isn't a great way of thinking. Like that, we're all the same and that shouldn't make a difference. Like, if anything, I'm super lucky to have been born here and live here and grow up here, so that's something that Kelly Yang also explores in there, which I think is really interesting take. I like the way that she explained what privilege is and how people can use that to their advantage, knowingly using that to their advantage to benefit themselves, where and then also disadvantaging other people on the side as a consequence, even though those people are as smart or even smarter than them or have the same capabilities or could probably do things better than them. And that is such a great reflection of society as a whole. There's a saying that goes, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And sometimes that really is a thing within how our society works and how people get about things. To me, I feel like it's whether you're using your privilege not just to benefit yourself but also to help other people, and I think that's a discussion that's happening right now. But the way that it's executed in this book is a really interesting way, especially when they're in high school and it's a high school setting, how people can still use that privilege against other people who are a bit more disadvantaged, a bit more vulnerable. And yes, I did feel like an emotional and personal attachment to that, but that's purely because of what I knew from Kelly Yang's background and how much of her personal experience she actually put into this book. So it shows that she's putting effort and, you know, is really invested. She isn't just writing a story for purely for entertainment, but more to convey a message or deliver a meaning. And it comes across really well, at least to me. I did read a lot of mixed reviews around how people couldn't really get attached to the characters or really like the characters and they're flawed. And I can kind of see that. Like, there are some things in the book that I don't agree with execution wise, like the girls' behaviors and their attitude. But I definitely think that comes down to maturity in terms of the character's age and the fact that I'm definitely a lot older than them. I'm fairly sure, like, at least 9 years older than them in this book. So to me, I would have done things differently, but then I have to realize that they're still in high school and their way of thinking is still very, very different to mine. So I'm willing to kind of overlook that for what this book has delivered for me and what I've gained from this book. Um, that's probably why I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, because I've thought about it and thought about, the plot, the pacing, the character development, which could have been tweaked here and there, especially with the pacing of the book. And like I said, it's a very short book, so there was so much to unpack. But for the first bit maybe or so, I was kind of like, yeah, okay, like what's happening, what's going on with this book. But I guess it was just Kelly Young's way of setting up the story. But yeah, like I would really highly recommend people read Parachutes and see what you get out of it for yourself. I thoroughly enjoyed it because I felt like it was really impactful and left an impression on me. There was a lot to think about, a lot that I learnt from it as well. Like I said, I didn't even know what parachutes, like I didn't even know the term parachutes because we don't use it here in Australia. As well as I wouldn't have understand the perspective of someone who has moved from overseas into a Western country and having to deal with not just, you know, the separation from family and friends, but also integrating into a new country, new system, schooling system as well. That's such a big thing. But yeah, like I said, 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a great read. I think you should read it as well. I hope I made sense in this review. If you have read it, let me know what you think down below. I would love to have a discussion with you about it. Otherwise, if you haven't, are you planning to read it as well? I'd also like to mention, before we finish up, that currently in Melbourne right now, we are experiencing a huge rise in cases of the coronavirus. As a result, 9 public housing buildings have been locked down, and basically what that means is that these people are living in government granted homes, but they're not up to standard, not up to scratch, and as a result, people are living in very small confined spaces, and which has resulted in a spread in cases. So they have locked down those 9 buildings, which in itself is really problematic because those people can't leave to go to work, and they're usually essential workers who have low income and really need that income, as well as the fact that they can't leave to access mental health or even normal health care. These people are mostly from migrant or refugee backgrounds and are non-English speakers. A lot of them would have, left their country, which are war-torn countries, and are already traumatized or have experienced traumatic experiences. And the government have now manned these buildings with a number of law enforcement bodies. So many police officers are in this area, and it's creating a huge problem. So the government have come out to say, yes, we are going to be funding these people and ensuring that they get resources, but there have been stories and concerns that have come out saying that they haven't received the right resources, the necessities that they need. So I will link links down below in terms of reading about it, what we can do to help, because there is a long way to go with this, considering we're not seeing a decrease in cases. But I really feel for these people. So yeah, that's something that I wanted to address. Otherwise, I hope you guys are having a great day, and I shall see you guys soon. Bye.